it's my pleasure tonight to welcome you all here for the fifth in our series on sex, gender, and sexuality. And tonight I'm pleased to be able to introduce our speaker. Allie Miller has been a licensed therapist since 2002 and became executive director of the Starting Point in Westmont, New Jersey in November of 2015. Allie holds a Master of Arts in Clinical Counseling with a concentration in marriage and couples and family therapy. He was the recipient of the Class of 2002 Outstanding Graduate Award from the Graduate Clinical Counseling Psychology Department at LaSalle. He also has a significant background in business with a PhD in business administration and spent many years as a professor at Rutgers, Drexel, and University of Wisconsin before turning to a psychotherapy practice full-time. Some of the issues that he helps his clients with are anxiety, depression, trauma, and abuse, childhood sexual abuse, self-worth and self-esteem, adult children of alcoholics, codependency, improved intimacy with and communications, sexual issues, and sexual concerns, to name a few. So without further ado, my friend, Allie Miller.
Thank you, Ellen, and welcome. I should say, thank you for welcoming me. As you can tell, I'm a little bit nervous. I don't do this very often. So I'm hoping I don't do a big face plant here tonight. I've got a little bling here later on. I'm hoping that'll liven up the audience. But I was going to introduce myself a little bit, but I think Ellen did a pretty good job of that. I wanted to start out with a quote, death by PowerPoint. I'm hoping we're going to avoid that tonight, okay? And I have unknown there. Maybe that's something that I made up. I don't know, but I'm hoping that we don't have death by PowerPoint tonight. I think you'll find my slides are pretty minimal. And I'm going to do very little reading from them, but I will be doing some. So as I said, I think Ellen did a very good job of introducing me and telling you a little bit about me. But one thing I did want to mention is that, because you might kind of think, well, how did you get from teaching accounting to doing the work you're doing now? I think that's a reasonable question. And what I say is that I did my own personal emotional work when I was about 40 years old. I was in therapy myself pretty intensively for a couple of years. I received tremendous benefit from that. And so I wanted to offer that to other people. And I was always trying to figure out ways to do that. As I was telling Jack earlier this evening, I think in the early 90s, about the time I was starting therapy, I tried massage therapy and went through massage school. I enjoyed that, but I didn't think I could earn a living doing that day after day. And then I went through an interfaith seminary program, and I got a great deal out of that. And it's at that point that I said, you know, I think I have to go back and get a traditional degree in counseling. And so when I was age 46, I started my master's program at LaSalle, and then I graduated when I was 49. And so I've been doing that part-time ever since 2002. And then became full-time in 2013. That's when I left the classroom. So anyway, maybe that's way more than you need to know about me, okay? I also wanted to just speak briefly about the Starting Point. I'm the executive director of the Starting Point. And the Starting Point, it's not a counseling center per se. We have a number of people that provide those services, but Starting Point really builds itself as an educational referral services. And our mission is to assist people on multiple levels, and we try as best as we can find help for people regardless of their financial means. And I'll talk just briefly about how we do that. So we are located in Haddon Township, as Ellen had mentioned, and I believe one of the handouts that you were given as you came in this evening on the table was Starting Point, some of the material from Starting Point. And you can see one of the very first pages. It's a very small sheet. It lists some of the 15 support groups that meet there weekly, and most of them are free. There is usually a Goodwill basket that is passed. And some of them and many of them are 12-step based, but not all of them, certainly. Our founder, Vincent D. Pasquale, gives free lectures at noon and 7 p.m. every Wednesday. Again, a Goodwill basket or Goodwill offering is made at those lectures. And he speaks on many topics, often related to recovery, spirituality, family of origin, those kinds of things. And Vince, if you've been in the recovery field at all, you probably have certainly encountered Vince, or at least his name. We have about 30 counselors or therapists that practice there. And about half of our counselors or therapists are in network for some insurance plan of some sort. And for people that are low income, we usually will assign them to an intern. And so say if there's a financial burden or financial limits for people, often they will be connected to an intern. So again, we try not to turn anybody away who needs help. So I wanted to know a little bit about you, the audience. Okay, so this is where the bling comes in here, okay? So now, unlike other presentations that tell you to turn your cell phones off, I'd like you to take your cell phone out, if you have one, or if you have a tablet, and if you don't have a phone or a tablet, that's fine. Now you can respond. We're going to do some real-time polls through either your cell phone or your tablet. And if you're going to the website, you can go to thepollev.com and type in that code there. And then you should be connected to the poll. Or if you want to use your cell phone, you would be texting to the number 22333. And then your message, your body message, is going to be Allie Miller 539. And that can be either upper or lower case. And I'm going to give you a little bit of time to log in. And if you send a text, you should be getting something back that says some kind of message, right? It's still working. Okay, that's fine. Okay. Are some people getting connected? Okay, good. Yeah, I know it takes a while to get that connected. Okay, yes, cool. So people pretty much getting connected there. I'll leave this up a little bit longer, although it's also going to appear in the next slide as well too. So this is going to be, yes, are you having difficulty?
No, I got on it fine. I answered one question, but it's just staying there. Is it supposed to?
Oh, right, because I think we're not to that slide yet. Oh, so it's connected to the slide. So can you already see the answers or the questions?
Yeah, I saw just the first question.
Okay, yeah.
And then it just said it recorded my response.
Okay. So is everybody logged in, those that have their device with them? Okay, so okay, oops. Let's see. Yes, I should be, but I'm hoping I can remember how to do it now. I thought I'd taken care of this at the beginning. So I must not have, sorry.
If you don't want this to be your password, I think you can press E on your...
Yeah, I think my password is fine. That's, okay, if I can remember what it is here. Okay, so now the poll should be open. Yes?
Yeah, I don't think you have to make a password.
No, I don't, no. Oh, yeah, no, yeah, you shouldn't need to know. Nope, nope. Yep, So every time somebody enters and sends in a response, then the poll is automatically updated. Oh, say the age group 41-55 disappeared. What happened to that? Okay.
Decided to be honest.
Yes. Oh, okay. Okay. So it looks like a pretty kind of like a, what do they call that, bimodal distribution here, right? So a lot of younger people and then people that are 56 years of age and older. A few sprinklings in the middle there. Okay. Let's go to the next one here. Oops, clicker here. Oh, we got some more late entries coming in? Okay. So just to get an idea, how far did you travel tonight to get here? And if any of you are educators, I mean, this can be a fun thing to do in classrooms, I would expect, right? I'm not in the classroom anymore, but so I thought this gives me a chance to play with this technology. So again, most of it looks like 60% of you about have traveled between 5 and 10 miles to get here. And somebody, or at least one person, has traveled more than 20 miles, so good for you. Okay, I think I've got one more here then. Oops, clicker, sorry. Okay, so what gender would you identify with primarily? And I have other there because, again, I'm trying to get away from the binary thing here. Certainly would be appropriate for this series here. Okay. Okay. Good. So primarily female, and I see about a decent representation of male, and then at least one person is identified as other, as non-binary. Okay, good. So thanks. We'll be using this again, so don't put your phone away too far. You can put it on vibrate or silent, but I'm going to ask you a couple of other things a little bit later. Okay, so let's move on. So I just want to give you a heads up. Some of the language that I'm going to be using can be frank and of a sexual nature. Again, it's not intended to be prurient or titillating, but we are talking about sex and sexuality here, so there might be some language that, you know, that you wouldn't be normally speaking or using around the dinner table there, possibly. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on just talking about sexual health, because I think with respect to sexuality and sexual expression, certainly I think sexual health comes into it. And so I want to spend just a little bit of time about that. And this may not necessarily be relating just to the LGBT community. This is, I think, just for everybody here. And the World Health Organization actually has been working in sex and sexuality since, I think, 1974, 75 here. And they did put out a technical bulletin. So the World Health Organization is not just concerned about infectious diseases and those types of things. They actually are concerned, and they have had on their radar sex and sexuality. And there are a couple of working definitions here I thought that were pretty good and pretty important from the World Health Organization. One is they have the working definition of sex, and this is probably something that was discussed in one of the earlier presentations here, is they talk about sex is really, from their perspective, is really the biology of things, and is not really related to the sexual activity. What we do in our normal everyday language, we talk about sex and we talk about that being sexual activity. So they're using the biological aspect when they refer to sex. And they talk about sexual health, and these are some important definitions, and I will read this one. They said sexual health is a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. It is not merely the absence of disease, dysfunction, or infirmity. Sexual health requires a positive and respectful approach to sexuality and sexual relationships, as well as the possibility of having pleasurable and safe sexual experiences free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. For sexual health to be attained and maintained, the sexual rights of all persons must be respected, protected, and fulfilled. That's a pretty powerful statement, and certainly if we as a culture could buy into that, I think that'd be pretty significant. And I'm sure it's on your minds as well too. It comes to mind the Weinstein thing that's going on right now. It's kind of exploding on the tabloids, and you know, certainly it appears, again, he's not had his day in court certainly, but appears certainly with all the multiple reports that there was a great deal of coercion based upon the power differential between him and the other people. And also I saw an article, was it yesterday or today, that actually some of the men, actors, had come out and had talked about some of the sexual assault that they had experienced as well too, working in Hollywood. And sexual health cannot be defined, understood, or made operational without a broad consideration of sexuality, which underlies important behaviors and outcomes related to sexual health. So the WHO's working definition of sexuality is a central aspect of being human throughout life encompasses sex, gender identities and roles, sexual orientation, eroticism, pleasure, intimacy, and reproduction. Sexuality is experienced and expressed in thoughts, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, values, behaviors, practices, roles, and relationships. While sexuality can include all of these dimensions, not all of them are always experienced or expressed. Sexuality is influenced by the interaction of biological, psychological, social, economic, political, cultural, legal, historical, religious, and spiritual factors. Those are a lot of factors, right? And again, I probably tonight can just begin to cover some of the basic things here. But we will be talking about some of these a little bit later. Okay, so that's who, okay? I also thought I would take a few minutes to talk about some of the sexual dysfunctions that are listed in the DSM-5. That's the Bible, if you will, for psychologists and psychiatrists. So I kind of group them in sexual disorders that both men and women can experience. And again, my apologies right up front. You can see I'm resorting right to this binary thing right away, okay? And again, I don't have the language for it yet myself, so I'm working on it as well. So those that, again, both, pretty much anybody, I guess you could say, experience would be substance or medication-induced sexual dysfunction. As you may know, that there are some medications that do affect sexual functioning. Gender dysphoria, you know, I'm hoping at some point that one might go away, because we only know gender dysphoria because we've had a society telling us certain messages about that, but right now it is in there. And one of the things, and again, probably you know this is kind of my quick way of explaining this or giving you an example. When I think of gender dysphoria, when I think of dysphoria in general, I think it's when somebody looks in the mirror that what they're seeing back does not match kind of their internal representation of who they are. And certainly in our culture, you know, we've been very binary. There are men and there are women, and you belonged into one place or the other. And if you had an internal representation that you were, let's say, more feminine or female, and yet you had, looking back in the mirror from you, a representation or somebody that looks like a man, there was gender dysphoria there. Another thing, too, that I don't know if you would know this or not, but people that suffer or have a DID, dissociative identity disorder, they also may have gender dysphoria as well, too, because then that's, by the way, that's formally known as multiple personalities. So some of those personalities, even though the central, or the primary personality is, let's say, female and grew up and raised as a female, some of the personalities that person may carry would actually identify more as a male. And so when that personality is out front and they look in the mirror, they can have dysphoria. That does not match who they think they are. And of course, there then are the paraphiliac disorders, exhibitionism, voyeurism, frottage, masochism, sadism. And again, these tend to be more prevalent among men, but not exclusively as well. And also, as you know, some of these paraphiliac things, they actually are legal as well, too. So you can get in legal problems if you are engaged in them. So these are the sexual disorders that women may experience: female orgasmic disorder, female sexual interest or arousal disorder. So in other words, there's just a lack of interest, or women cannot get aroused. For example, they might not be able to lubricate enough for pleasurable intercourse. And then there's also genital pelvic pain or penetration disorder. So that means that for the traditional penile, vaginal intercourse, they either cannot have penetration or the penetration is painful or difficult. And some of the disorders that men may experience, again, according to the DSM-5, there's erectile disorder. I mean, we see that all over the place, right? That's advertised on TV, or at least the correction for it or the treatment for it. And some men might have premature early ejaculation. Some men might have the opposite, and they might actually take too long to ejaculate. And then, of course, males also have low sexual desire at times as well, too. So that's just a brief overview of some of the DSM sexual disorders there. And again, I brought these up because, again, someone can come into a therapist's office with these, and it can be distressing to them. Okay. And since this is like sexuality and well-being, I thought that was appropriate to put them in there. Okay. So now we're going to talk about some other issues and factors that influence our mental health regarding our sex, sexuality, gender, and gender expression there. And this, by the way, is not an exhaustive list at all. I just kind of came up with some things that I think are probably most commonly seen here. Oh, okay, another poll. Bring out your phones. So, like to know, from whom did you learn most of your sexual education when younger? And I have education quotes because it may not have been all that educational. For me, I'll do a little bit of personal disclosure here. My peers, probably most of mine was from my peers, and they were probably as ill-informed as I was, okay? So I don't know if that was really an education or not, okay? So, oh, a lot of peers here. So I see thus far nobody has said that most of their education came from their religious teachers or authorities. Okay. So that's surprising, actually, in my opinion. Again, maybe it's a generational thing as well too. I'm nearing retirement age, or I should say traditional retirement age, and of course, I was raised in rural Wisconsin. Raised on a dairy farm. Boys, zero, absolutely no sex education whatsoever. The girls, when they were in 6th or 7th grade, they got the movie, okay? And of course, boys had an extended recess during that time, and the girls were forbidden to talk about what that movie was or what was contained in that movie. So, but the boys got absolutely zero sex education. Now, I would like to think that that is different today, but see, that's what it was back in the 60s and early 70s. Okay, so which statement best reflects the attitude around sex and sexuality in your household while growing up? Yes?
Just like in general?
Yeah. Yeah, in general, yeah. I mean, obviously, we can't, there's all kinds of nuances in here, really. But just kind of want to get a general sense of what the attitude was in your household around sex and sexuality. Interesting. So the most common was there was a relatively okay attitude, 47%, but then I find it interesting that the second largest response is the subject of sex and sexuality was never even discussed in the household. Again, maybe that's not surprising. Okay. I know, again, in my household, sex, if it was brought up, tend to be in terms of bawdy jokes, dirty jokes that my father would typically tell, and my mother would scold him for it, usually. But, you know, that was about the extent of it. Okay. Well, again, I think because I was raised on a farm, I did kind of have some biology as an example, you know, that other people wouldn't see. So some of my misinformation was corrected by watching some of the farm animals there, yes, and seeing what went on there. So, okay. Okay. So I put this up there because I think this is important when we talk about any kind of distress or things that are troubling us or problematic for us. And this comes from a book called The Love Response. And I can't pronounce her last name. If I had to guess, I'd say it's Glub, but that sounds like I'm just kind of trying to cough up a fur ball or something like that. So, so I don't know how to pronounce her name, but she wrote this book. She's a psychiatrist, by the way, And I agreed with her. She said that if you really boil things down, there are two things that people sit with that bother them. One, they either think they're not good enough, there's something wrong with them, and I see that a lot, and we talk about that. But she also said that a second thing that she says is many people sit with that I don't have enough. And those were her two major themes that she saw consistently among her patient population. And again, I would agree that that's true. I would have to agree with her assessment of that. Now, my thoughts that I usually share with my clients is I said, often our suffering is created by the thoughts and beliefs we tell ourselves about ourselves. In fact, I have a client one time who was in recovery. He said, I have two people in my head. He said, I've got a crazy person talking. He said, I've got a second crazy person that's listening. So I thought that was a good expression. So again, I do think that it's what we are telling ourselves that really is creating the problems and the distress for us. And again, this is not just around sex and sexuality. I think it's really about many parts of our life here, really. So one of the things that I think that comes into play with respect to sex and sexuality and well-being is the idea of ageism. Old is not sexy, right? I mean, I don't believe that, by the way, but I'm saying that I think in our culture, in our society, we get the message that old is not sexy. And certainly everything is reinforced by that. You know, all of the ads, there are little places where you might see that changing in terms of maybe some movies, but also it very commonly, and again, it's a gender thing as well too. Have you noticed in movies, old leading males can have very young female opposites, but would you ever see the opposite of that? Typically not, right? Unless it's a certain kind of movie, right? But I think ageism is actually very prevalent. It does affect our perceptions. And again, I think more women are adversely affected by this than men. I think for many years, perhaps maybe for most of the years, men have gotten the pass on this because men have not had really needed to care how they look, right? So I think that is changing though as well too, but I think it's more common that a woman would show up in the office and saying, you know, I don't like how I look now that I'm getting older. In fact, I just took a phone call from somebody not too long ago, and that was what she was telling me essentially. So I think that men, again, maybe there's changing a little bit. And I found this, I think it's I found this statistic, and again, it did not surprise me. They said women more than men have body images, especially as they age, and they said over 92% of plastic surgery procedures are on women. So over 90% of plastic surgery procedures are on women. They said, and the ones that men get tend to be the non-invasive types, like the Botox kinds of things. But women are, you know, doing the facelifts and, you know, that kind of thing. So anyway, I do see that changing a little bit. Men are probably moving towards that as well too. But again, I think unfortunately in our culture, women have suffered from that more than men. Okay, now we could talk a long time about this, and you might have ideas that I've not even thought of, and if so, I'm hoping you will maybe put them up at the end of the thing here. So I'm just going to talk about some of the things here. And as I mentioned before, most of us have grown up in a binary world. There's either boys or there's girls. And those rules are pretty rigid about what is a boy and what's appropriate for a boy and what is appropriate for a girl. Now, I also think research has shown, though, that boys grow up in a society where the gender rules are much more rigid and strict. Would anybody disagree with that, do you think? So, you know, as an example, you know, I'm thinking about, and I think the consequences for a boy not observing appropriate gender rules, I think the consequences are more severe or more strict, more adverse for him. For example, you know, and again, I'm resorting to the binary thing here, but a young girl who might be showing like more masculine traits, she might be called a tomboy, right? And I think most people, you know, wouldn't think that there is a great deal of, you know, there's not a lot of stigma attached to that. But if a boy is showing more feminine qualities, I think he's got a lot nastier names that he's called. And again, and it might be my bias, having grown up as male and being identified as male. But again, I think research has shown that boys are subject to more strict gender roles and rules. Another thing too that just came to mind now when I was talking about this, and again, this I remember from my development class in my studies. They were saying that, I remember hearing or reading that girls who develop more quickly and sooner than their peers, that's actually a disadvantage to them socially, that tends not to be a good thing. They tend to be made fun of. Whereas boys, if they develop and enter puberty more quickly than their peers, that's a good thing for them. So it's just all this weird stuff about boys and girls. Yes, yeah.
Well, I'm thinking of it in terms of what we've been learning in this lecture series in the last few weeks about kids who aren't identifying as trans, and how when you're a kid and you haven't gotten to your secondary sexual characteristics before, that happen during adolescence, I think it's probably easier for a person born female who identifies as male to wear male clothes, as in elementary school, than it is for a person born with male biology to wear and express as a female.
I would agree with that, yes. Yeah. So did everybody hear the comments about that? Okay. I would agree with that. And it is odd here. There was a point I was going to... Oh, yes. So, like, what's one of the worst things a man could call another man or a boy could call another boy? Call him a girl, right? I mean, that's like really bad, okay? There's like nothing worse than that. But again, I think it's related, though, to how women historically have rated in our culture, right? And again, I think that's why women have more of the things about needing to look better, and so men have had a lot of advantages certainly in that, I say, but in this area, I think men are distinctly not advantaged at all. Also, I think everybody should be aware that gender and sexual, that's something that's not constant over time. It is dependent on time, and it's dependent upon culture. As an example, again, I'm showing my age here, but I was thinking about in the early 60s when the Beatles came out. Now, prior to that time, did anyone ever see a boy wearing long hair? I mean, maybe, but it was really unusual. But the Beatles introduced men wearing long hair and allowing to be wear long hair. And that pretty much has stayed ever since that time. Another example that I have is I have a very good friend who was raised in India, and he told me that in his, and he identifies as being heterosexual, he said that in India, he said if you have a very good male friend, another boy friend, and isn't that another odd? A girlfriend can say she has a girlfriend, right? But a boy can't say that he has a boyfriend, because there's just a lot of stuff around that. So anyway, he has a boy friend, and he said it was not uncommon for them to walk down the street holding hands. Now, you would not see that in this culture, in this country, certainly. I mean, that would be seen as very odd. But he said in India, he said that was not unusual at all. And another example that just came to mind recently, I recently traveled to Germany and visited one of the palaces over there and had the DVD and watched the DVD. And in the DVD, the person was dressed up, portraying as if he were the person that had designed the palace or built the palace or whatever it was. And of course, wearing this fancy coat with all this gold and silver on it, and of course the white powdered wig and the heavy makeup on the face. And I say, in that time, that was okay for a man to do that. So, but again, today's age, in this age, no. So again, the idea that this does change over time, and I'd like to think that perhaps these series are helping people educate about this, that we don't get so hung up on the rigidity of the sex roles and the gender roles there. Okay. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're good. Okay. Homophobia, the dislike or prejudice against homosexual people. LGBT people have made tremendous strides in the last decades. Again, I'm seeing things on TV and have access to things, movies, TV programs, that would have been unheard of when I was young. But in my opinion, there is considerable homophobia that still exists in our culture. And I believe it's responsible for a tremendous amount of bullying, berating, demeaning, all kinds of bad things. And I'm hoping that that does change over time. And I don't know what this is about. And I'm sure there are studies about that. And I don't pretend to be an expert about that. But this is significant for most people, especially people that identify as being LGBT, because it becomes internalized. And I think it's the thing about other. So if you see something that is other or is different from you, there's some kind of response, and it seems to be a fear response. Why could not that be a curiosity response rather than a fear response? I don't know. We could. But I think certainly our culture, our TV movies, everything is about us versus them kind of thing. And so whether if there's an other out there, that's usually something we need to kill, or we need to suppress, or we need to, somehow get them to submit. And so I don't know. I'm hoping that over time that this will change. But again, I think it's that other part there. Yet, what I find interesting, though, is we have a tremendous interest in who is gay and who is not. Do we not, as a culture? I mean, isn't that the headlines that scream in those tabloids? So-and-so has a secret gay lover or something like that. So we are afraid of it, yet we're entertained, or we're like really interested in that. To me, that's just really curious. So, but again, this is a big one, I think, for us. And as I said before, I think a lot of people that identified as LGBT, they have to work through their own internalized homophobia, because they have received the messages while they were growing up that it's not okay to be that way. And again, this is difficult. And I mentioned this one time to a friend of mine who identifies as being straight. And when I talked about, a gay person that having internalized homophobia, and he laughed. And because he thought that that wasn't possible, that if you were an out gay person, that you couldn't possibly have internalized homophobia. And that is absolutely not the case. It is prevalent, very, very prevalent in the LGBT community to have internalized homophobia. And again, I think it is so subtle at times that people don't even recognize that they have that. And it can be difficult to face that, because then if you start working with that, then you have to deal with your own internalized shame that you have about that. And of course, I think many, many, many of us have been influenced about what's appropriate with respect to sexuality by our religious teachings and tenets there. I heard one therapist saying, kind of jokingly, but probably there's truth, and he said, as long as the Catholic Church is in business, he said, I'm going to have clients for the rest of my life. So, so in terms of LGBT clients there. And again, these go in, I think, at a very, very early age. And again, these can be deeply, deeply rooted. And I know it's difficult for people, because this really creates a lot of tension for a person to work through this, because they often have tremendous loyalty to their faith, and I understand that. And for many aspects of their life, they receive a great deal of comfort, support, strength from their faith. And yet there's some of these things in there that say, you know what, you're not okay in this if you do this or you do that. So. Now, I wanted to bring out to your attention, though, that all of these influences that I've talked about recently, or the last four, the ageism, the gender roles, things like that, those are influences that come from outside of ourselves. So these are messages that we have taken on from other people, other sources, and again, we have internalized them on some level. And this is, I think, where the difficulty comes in for a person, because their sense of who they are is influenced by these other factors. And I just mentioned 4 here. There's others as well, too. And so their internal experience is influenced by this, and that creates problems for them. And in fact, I went to a spiritual workshop, I guess you'd call it, just recently, and the presenter said, you know, he said, if you love yourself unconditionally, everything's gonna be fine. I thought, well, that is true, but how does one do that? You know, I think that's why people get into therapy. I would think it's one of the reasons, because I mean, it's fine. Again, I do agree that if we could love ourselves unconditionally, we wouldn't have to worry about any of these things we've talked about here. But I say getting there, that's a process, okay? And that might take some years of therapy, actually. Okay, and I wanted to just mention briefly trauma, and I think particularly sexual trauma as well can profoundly affect how we experience sex and express ourselves as sexual beings. I do work with men who are sexually abused as kids. And in fact, some of you know this, maybe you don't. Of course, it has gotten a lot of press over the recent years, at least. I think the statistics are like 1 in 4 girls were sexually abused as kids in some way, or sexually traumatized. And it's like 1 in 5 boys are sexually traumatized or sexually abused as kids. Now, in the 90s, there was no such thing as boys being sexually abused. That just did not exist. But it certainly does exist, and it is now coming out. And again, of course, I think the more we hear about that, I think it probably really started when we started hearing about the clergy abuse. And of course, the Jerry Sandusky case, and I think that was around 2011. By the way, I just read that his appeal for a new trial was denied, correct? Right. So, and again, this really is very, very sad for many, many people to have experienced something that for which they are not prepared to experience. And often it is perpetrated by someone whom they trust. And so this really messes with their mind. And I see it can take some work to work through that. And also I just wanted to briefly mention too, I think that sex can be used as a self-soothing mechanism. And it's a way that we can affect our mood, moderate our mood. And I think it's an extreme form. It can lead to a sex addiction of type as well too. So, and again, if you dig underneath this sex addiction, and again, I put the word addiction in quotes there because according to the DSM, there is not such a thing as sex addiction. They have not classified it yet as a recognizable, diagnosable disorder. But certainly there are people, I think, that express themselves sexually in an unhealthy way. Okay. Okay, so again, now if you have identified as other, feel free. I'm going to have 2 polls here. One is a question for women, and then I'm going to have a question for men. So for those, and again, if you've identified as other, you can choose either one or the other. So this is for the women in the audience. So if you had a personal concern or issue regarding your sex or sexuality, who is the first person that you are most likely to talk about it with? Okay, so it appears that about half of you, or I should say about, it is half of the people who responded. Oh, it's down to, oh, go on, changing, okay. But about half, nearly half, said that they would talk to a same-sex friend about that, okay. And then I guess about a quarter to their spouse or romantic partner there, okay. And 15%. So you can see the results there. Again, I don't find that particularly surprising. Again, I think women are more inclined to talk with their same-sex friends about issues that they're concerned about. Okay, Now, for the men, I know you might feel a little exposed here because there's not a lot of it in there, but if you don't mind. So now, how about men? If you had a question or concern about sex or sexuality, who is the first person that you are most likely to respond to? Oh. Okay, so this group might be a little bit more enlightened, I don't know if that's the right word, than I thought they might be. Because again, I think most men are disinclined to talk about this type of stuff with their same-sex friends. Same-sex conversations are about Phillies, Eagles, and 76ers, okay, and that's it, okay? And obviously I'm making some stereotypes there, but again, I think men in general are disinclined to talk about this stuff with their same-sex friends. If you can, if you have friends that you can talk about this and you're a guy, I think that's great, absolutely. Okay. So how do you navigate in this world where you might feel you're less than, okay? Well, I think you need to either create or find a support system, find community. No, so this may consist of a support group, in person or virtual. You want to find your sympathetic, understanding friends and or family members. You might want to reconnect with religious roots or tradition or spiritual community. Again, that's if it's supportive. If you're identifying as LGBT and you're struggling with coming out, do not go to a church, in my opinion, that says, I'm going to pray the gay away, okay? So make sure it's a supportive community there. Join welcoming, inclusive support groups, or social groups, I should say. And probably most of you know of the meetup.com website. You can find all kinds of groups that meet there, okay? Become an activist. That's a good way, okay? Read and research. Again, I think that's what many people do now. Of course, thankfully to the internet, we have plenty of access to lots of research. Some of it might be a little bit shady perhaps, but again, tremendous resources on the research. So watch appropriate, relevant movies and YouTubes. I've mentioned the It Gets Better series on YouTube. Any of it, you know about the It Gets Better? I think it was Dan Savage, I think started, am I correct in that? I think Dan Savage started that. So it's messages for LGBT youth, for people that are identified as LGBT, and it doesn't even need to be LGBT, it's just for people that are older. It says, you know, I know it's a rough patch right now. You're coming and struggling with coming out, whatever, but it gets better. And there's hundreds of people. I think even former President Obama created a YouTube video for that. And of course, I have to mention, talk to an understanding, knowledgeable professional counselor therapist, okay? And again, I think that should be part of the support system for you as well, too. Okay. So I just mentioned a couple of resources here, and they should also be on the outline as well, too. I think one of the issues for LGBT people is they may have difficulty finding a medical provider that they are comfortable with. And one of the resources is the GLAMA, and it's a website there, and you can actually find a provider on there. So that is a resource for people, that they might find somebody that either you know, is gay friendly or is an ally. And I've mentioned the Mazzoni Center. Okay, I didn't know someone was coming from the Mazzoni Center, but they're a great resource. They're in Philadelphia, and they provide both health and mental health services as well, too. And of course, I have to give my own plug here for the starting point. We have many very affirming, welcoming counselors and therapists at the starting point that have practices there that are happy to help people. And of course, if you have any questions about me, you know, you're certainly welcome to contact me. Even, I'm not saying you need to see me, but you know, I'd be happy to plug you in with somebody if you felt that you would like some help there, okay? Okay, so I think we're pretty good with time, correct? Okay, good. So, if you have questions, you may type them in. You can text them to me. So again, this would allow you to do something anonymously, and I'm going to leave them on the screen here unless I see something pop up that looks pretty inappropriate, in which case I'll kill the screen. But if you have a question for me or have a comment, you're also welcome to raise your hand the old-fashioned way. But if you want to ask a question, you know, and especially if you want to do it anonymously, you can type it in. Yes, Jack?
You had mentioned about films, and it occurred to me just after you mentioned that this could very well be a research project, maybe even a doctoral dissertation, on the treatment of LGBTQ, especially male gays, in the films of the late 40s, 50s, and early 60s, in which they began to emphasize the tragedy of gayness.
Yes.
Second thing that came out of that was that frequently the solution to someone who was living a straight life, who was discovered to be gay, was suicide. Now,
So that was the solution, right? Yeah.
that was the solution.
Yeah.
Sometimes those things were not so subtle.
Yeah.
Other times they were very, very subtle. That's a message of talking about Hollywood mainstream films.
Yeah. So I think, if I can paraphrase what you're saying, is that there could be a research project here, a doctoral dissertation, to kind of talk about the history of how LGBT people are portrayed in the movies. Am I hearing that correctly? Yes.
Mainstream movies.
Mainstream movies, and how they have changed from in the early 40s to 50s. They were portrayed as one way, and to say one part of the solution was to commit suicide, right? That would fix it, okay? And even within my memory, again, because in my memory growing up, you know, because I graduated high school in '71. I know don't even do the math, okay? That, you know, they were starting to just have movies that were featured gay men. And those early movies, I'm thinking like Boys in the Band is like one of them. I mean, those were some tragic figures in those movies.
Midnight Cowboy.
Midnight Cowboy was another one too, yes, yeah. And now it's very different, right? So, I mean, but that shows like there's an evolution here with respect to, I would like to think culturally. So, okay, so what do we got going on here? Okay. I'll answer this first. Are there support groups for parents or trans queer for whom this may be very new? I do not know of any, by the way. And, you know, I will kind of put that in the back of my mind, just maybe put that out there. Can I go, oops? Oh, there we go. I was wondering if there's some way I could go down, because I'm afraid I'm missing some things here. Let me start at the bottom here. The paraphiliac, are they really considered disordered? Well, they are diagnosable, yes. Okay. Extreme extent, or is it to the extreme? Well, again, I think your question is this maybe just another variation of eroticism, perhaps? I think that's the question, perhaps. I mean, it can be, but some of those activities I mentioned to you before, they are illegal. So, like the voyeurism, the exhibitionism, those are illegal. And there is, you know, a sexual charge associated with them. So am I kind of reading that correctly? I think, again, my sense is that people were asking, or the person was asking, is this just maybe another expression of like eroticism there? Did I lose a question at the bottom already? Okay. Do you know of welcoming inclusive place of worship? Yes, there are a number. Unitarian Church in Cherry Hill. Very welcoming, very inclusive. I think generally the UC, or is it the UCC? UCC, United Church of Christ. What is that? Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay. I think they're also very welcoming. Of course, I think, and I don't know if they still have it, the Metropolitan, that was in Philly. What's the Metropolitan? They actually met, I think, at William Way in Philly, and I don't know if they still do the Metropolitan Church.
Temple Manuel in Cherry Hill has a whole inclusion.
Okay, Temple Manuel, okay.
And next week, we'll also have an interfaith Q&A with representatives of some of those places. McCourt Shalom, First Baptist in Moorestown, and Transfaith
Okay, good. So show up next week to have that question answered, right? But yes, there absolutely are places that are welcome and inclusive. How would you advise someone who hasn't come out yet in regards to coming out to parents, guardians who are less than accepting? Oh, that might take a while there. Well, again, I think before that happens is you get your support system in place. And I think including all those things that I mentioned, maybe even including a therapist or a counselor would help you. Because again, if it is not well received, and it sounds like it may not be well received, or at least that's the expectation, you need, and I think you'll want to have somebody there to support you. I'll give you an example. You know, sometimes people have been injured. This is not necessarily related to the LGBTQ per se, but it can be that as well too. But I've heard people that's, you know, talk about injuries that they have received from their caregivers, either physical or emotional, and they have talked to them about that. Well, often what happens is they think this is going to be a big healing experience for them. I'm going to finally tell my mother, my father, whatever, you know, how they harmed me all these years, and I'm just going to finally get a chance to do that, and it's going to be a healing experience with you. Well, you know what? Not always, because what happens often is that you see that parent maybe doing the same thing about denying, minimizing, discounting, invalidating, so it actually can be a re-traumatizing experience for them. So this thing here where the coming out, again, you might think it will be a way to liberate yourself, and I think it is. I certainly would not discourage a person from doing that because I think it is important. But again, get your community, get your support system in place, and make sure that it's pretty solid before you do that. Okay. We answered that one. In regards to ageism towards men and women's sex, is it possible that some of this is also sexism? Okay, let me see. Yes, I think so. Yes. Mm-hmm. And if I did anything to promote that, my apologies. I'm hoping I didn't. So, but yes, I think so. I think this is sexism as well too. Yep, as well. Yep. Anybody else have anything they want to raise their hands for or put up on the screen? Yes.
Are you forgetting Debbie Moore? Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher?
Oh.
As opposed to all the other pairings that are flipped from them. Debbie Moore was at least 25 years older than Ashton.
Oh. Okay. Yes. Well. Yes. She's. Yes.
But it's the fact that we talk about it.
Yeah.
When you look at the head of France and his wife being older than him,
Mm-hmm.
and it's such a big news story, but there are lots of politicians who are married to
Oh, like President Trump, do you think being one of them?
much younger women, and people
Yes.
don't like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. In case people didn't hear, the comment was Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher, and the age difference where she being much decidedly older than he. And also the recent election of President Macron, I think, in France, and him having a much older wife. But those are certainly, I mean, they are talked about, right? You're right. People talk about those are headlines.
It's newsworthy.
But you know, if it's the other way around, oh, just, you know, okay, that's fine.
Here's a label for women, older women.
Oh, yes, right, yes. Yes.
There's a label for men too. It's called Lech.
Oh, another thing I wanted to bring to your attention too, or that came to mind as I was preparing for this, you know, and it goes to the sexual abuse thing. You know, you hear stories, let's say where a young boy, let's say an adolescent boy is, you know, has sex with one of his high school teachers, you know, and you see a lot, and actually a lot of men too. I don't think women so much, but a lot of men will kind of like nudge you to, hey, you know, lucky him kind of thing. And I mean, as a therapist, I find that appalling. You switch those genders or those sexes of those two parties, and you get a much different response, do you not? Again, it's just a very odd thing, I think, in our culture that somehow, and again, maybe it goes back to that thing back in the 90s or prior to the 90s where boys just couldn't be sexually abused. There wasn't such a thing as being sexually abused. But I find that very interesting.
Law, too, that traditionally penalties for those actions are less severe for women and minor.
In dealing with, okay.
Now, I'm not so sure.
And perpetrating against a young,
Written law, or whether it's interpretation by judicial authorities.
Yeah.
But I think there have been studies that would indicate there is a difference, which perpetuates that idea that somehow, if it's a minor male, it's not bad. It's lucky.
Yeah, right, yeah, yeah. He was just saying that there might even be perpetuated or codified in law, that actually there's lesser penalties for an older woman perpetrating against a younger boy, as if it were a switch there. Okay, anything else come up on the screen? CHOP has a support group. Oh, great. CHOP has a support group for parents of trans children. Okay, so whoever asked that question, thanks for adding. Okay, this is cool, right? Because you can actually respond to people's questions here. Okay, great. Okay. Any other questions you have about things? Let me see if I've got any other comments here that I haven't made or done. Oh, I know another thing that came to mind actually just before I came in here. You know, with LGBT folk, you know, one of the things that does happen, sadly, is as they age and they lose their support system, they end up having to go, let's say, into institutional setting. They often will go back in the closet because it's just not a safe place for them to be. And, you know, I think I did mention, you know, that in general, LGBT people, oh, and I think Ellen handed out this sheet about some alarming statistics about LGBT youth and how they're more victimized. And again, I'm not going to go through this, but it shows that they are at risk there. But again, it's very sad, you know, when you think about LGBT people, actually anybody, you know, as they age, somehow having to change their identity or end up covering up a part of themselves that has been a part of who they've been for many, many years. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's now old. There was 2 movies made. I think they were both called If These Walls Could Talk. Did any of you ever heard of that? I think it was, MTV made them maybe. I can't remember. And in each one, there were like 3 different scenarios at 3 different time periods. And the first one, and it was actually beautiful but absolutely heartbreaking. It was, let's say, I don't know what the time frame is. Let's say it was set in the early 60s or 50s. And I think Vanessa Redgrave was in it, and she had been living with her lesbian partner for years and years in the partner's house, and the partner passes away. And so her partner doesn't have any children, so a niece or a nephew comes in, and of course she's now having to, because she's in their home now because they are the ones, and it was actually heartbreaking, but it's very, very well done. And I'd recommend them if you can find them. I don't even know if you can find them anymore. They might even be on YouTube, who knows? It's called If These Walls Could Talk. It's 2 movies actually, and I think they're, and I think the second movie, the theme is around abortion, if I'm not mistaken. But the first one, I think, was not about that. It was about, I think, just women and in relationships and set in different time periods and how things are treated differently versus then versus now. But they're very well done, by the way. And I say it's been a long time since I've seen them, but they were very well done. Anything else that I have here? Oh, one other thing here too. It came to me as I was thinking about preparing for this. There is a book out there, it's very, very interesting, called, I think, Is God Made Him? Does anybody heard of that book? I think that's the name of it, Is God Made Him? And it's a true story. It's based on a set of twin boys. And during the circumcision procedure for one of them, something went awry. And actually, it damaged the penis significantly. And so John Money, I think that's his name. Is that right? Okay, he's a big name, and I think he's well known. Johns Hopkins, I think, is where he's at, or was at, because I think he's maybe now deceased, if I'm not mistaken. But he said that gender is absolutely culturally defined. You raise that boy as a girl, and he's going to be fine. She's going to be fine. As nature made him. Okay, thank you. But that was not how it turned out for that young boy. As nature made him. Yeah, as nature made him. And again, it's a very sad story. because this young boy, dressed in girls' clothes, they had his hair grow long, but it was interesting, compared to his brother, he was much more interested in masculine male activities than his brother was. But yet, and he resisted wearing the dresses and all that thing. And of course, it came up to the time where he was reaching puberty, and I think it was even before the time. Now I believe they have puberty delaying drugs that they would give somebody. But it was before that time, so they were either going to, have to start hormone treatment, something like that. And at that point, they told him what had happened. Up to that point, he was not aware that this had happened. And he just said, I'm having nothing to do with this gender reassignment or this sex reassignment stuff. So it's a very sad story, but it's well written. And I know that John Money's, I think, reputation took a hit as a result of that, but he was very well respected in that field, and maybe still is in many other ways. So any other questions? Anything come up on the thing? Oh, okay, good. Somebody provided this, the number for CHOP there. Thank you for that, whoever did that. Okay. Well, it's been my pleasure to speak to you tonight, and I thank you for your kind attention, and I hope I didn't do a big face plant here in front of you. So again, if I can be a resource of any kind of way, I have my website up there. I think I also have my email address as well too on that handout, or the outline that was handed out at the beginning there. So anyway, again, thank you for your kind attention, and welcome. Thank you.